This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's money hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. The inauguration for me was kind of like this mashup of Revenge of the Nerds and Game of Thrones.
Yes. What else can you throw in there? Some sort of animated, something just completely bizarre.
Beavis
Looney
and Butthead.
Tunes. Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day on what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on this show, we get to talk about some of the most interesting and important stories and trends in the news. John, back when 2016 and 2017 happened, we did this big rabbit hole on the podcast on politics, and I think it sort of turned all of us off on discussions of politics and that whole thing. And I know from reading some of the reviews on Apple Podcasts in particular that we turned off some listeners as well. And it kind of kept us away from any political discussions. And I want to say this, I think it's unavoidable this week. I think we've got to talk about it.
We have to get back there. Yeah.
But
we're going to lose some more listeners.
No, we might. But I want to say, I think there's a way to talk about all of this in a very factual, straightforward way. And the thing is, what's happening in Washington, D.C. this week with the second Trump administration is so much more about technology than it was the first time around.
Just look at who was at the inauguration.
There was Jeff Bezos. There was Mark Zuckerberg. There was Sundar Pichai. I mean, like all of the...
And then soon after, there was Larry Ellison.
Yes, exactly.
And can we say what happens there matters everywhere?
I guess it does.
What happens in the other Washington
Yes.
matters everywhere, playing off our motto.
Exactly. So the other person who was obviously there was Elon Musk. And to me, that is one of the most interesting things that is going to require watching over the next few months.
And I've got a quiz for you and the listeners related to that and his role.
Okay.
We'll just teasing ahead to that. So
you got to
remind
quiz.
me.
Okay. All right.
I'm just going to quiz you on something I've been thinking about as it relates to Elon.
Okay. That sounds good. So as you mentioned, Larry Ellison is there, and that relates to a big announcement that came the day after the inauguration. But with Elon, he is such a wild card in the middle of this entire mix. And we know that he is not a fan of Jeff Bezos. We know that he is not a fan of Microsoft. And in that regard...
Do we really know anything? I mean, I don't know. Okay. I really don't know.
So I'm basing this in part on emails that surfaced last year in the lawsuit that Elon Musk has filed against OpenAI, Microsoft's big AI partner, and his disdain for Microsoft's approach to OpenAI in the early days.
That one I think is more cemented. The relationship between Bezos and Musk, although they do compete on Blue Origin and SpaceX, there's been some back and forth on that. They seem like they're more brothers in many ways.
Do you think? I don't know. Okay,
do you think they really dislike each other?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but it's clear that the whims of Elon Musk could well become the policies, the decisions of Donald Trump when it comes especially to technology. I think Elon Musk has Trump's ear in a variety of ways. And if on one thing or another he decides that a big government contract, for example, from the Pentagon should be awarded to some other company, Oracle, or somebody else. So point number one, the wild card of Elon Musk and this new potential for him to influence the direction of the administration and therefore the country on key technology decisions. Point number two, you had Stargate, this announcement by Softbank and Oracle and OpenAI. And it's this $500 billion AI investment that they're planning to make in new data centers. And, this is interesting to me because here you have OpenAI going away from Microsoft in some ways. And you saw OpenAI and Microsoft acknowledge that they had changed the terms of their cloud computing agreement specifically so that OpenAI could participate in this. And this to me was kind of interesting and perhaps overblown in the media in terms of the implications for Microsoft, because Microsoft explained that in order to make this happen, OpenAI did this big agreement for this huge new cloud computing capacity with Microsoft. So even though Microsoft doesn't have the exclusive on OpenAI's cloud computing going forward, they still have the right of first refusal on it. And this concession by Microsoft effectively sort of giving up a past advantage in the terms of their contract came at the same time that OpenAI agreed to this big new contract.
It's messy.
Yeah,
it's messy.
I think
it's new, and so people aren't entirely sure what it is.
Exactly. So there's that whole thing. Point number 2 is that. And by the way, Elon Musk then questioned whether these companies would actually be putting $500 billion into this new fleet of AI data centers. And I don't know if you heard, did you hear the retort?
From Satya?
Yes. Here's Satya Nadella talking with Andrew Ross Sorkin on CNBC.
I don't know if you saw Elon Musk took to Twitter and said, they don't have the money. The money doesn't exist, as if this is not really going to happen. What do you think of that?
Look, all I know is I'm good for my $80 billion. I'm going to spend $80 billion building out Azure. Customers can count on Microsoft with OpenAI models being there everywhere in the world, serving OpenAI models and other models. That's, I think, what I know.
So this was a little confusing to me.
Yep.
Because they're not a direct investor in that $500 billion. They're
I can
80.
Explain this.
Yeah, okay. Explain this to me, because it tripped me up a bit.
At first, it did me as well until I remembered that Microsoft just recently said that it plans to spend $80 billion in capital expenditures on its own data centers this year. So that was an even more spicy comment by Satya, because he was saying, I don't care what those folks are doing. For us, we're spending, as Microsoft, $80 billion this fiscal year. And that is him putting his flag in the ground and saying, Microsoft is serious. Who cares what these other guys are doing?
Got it. Okay. So it isn't directly tied into the Stargate effort.
No. And I recognize that was confusing to a lot of people. Microsoft is kind of like a secondary partner in the Stargate thing, but not one of the primary investors. And I don't know if they're putting any actual money into it.
Didn't sound like they were.
Yeah.
What do you think Microsoft's play is with Stargate then? Just watching it play out, being on the sideline of it, supporting OpenAI?
I think so. I think they just want to have a little bit of a window seat into what goes on, and they might be involved in some of the data centers. But to me, it's actually a good thing for Microsoft to be partners with OpenAI and yet not be dependent on OpenAI, to loosen the ties a little bit. And in that way, I think what we saw this past week was probably a good thing for Microsoft. If they become overly reliant on OpenAI's technologies, their innovations, and start just completely outsourcing their AI to another company, I think that's when they start to be at risk. You've seen a little bit of a brain drain coming out of some of the Microsoft AI labs. In fact, there was one prominent researcher who ended up going to OpenAI. And that was one of the researchers who effectively proved that a massive increase in AI processing and in AI capacity could lead to the kinds of breakthroughs that we saw a few years ago with ChatGPT. And that really is the premise behind this whole Project Stargate, is if you can take that even further and start applying even more computing power to AI, like what could happen? What could happen potentially?
So then you saw this week that Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, came out and also threw stones at Microsoft in this whole debate, which we've had Mark on the podcast in the past, and was very blunt about his lack of enthusiasm around Microsoft and its AI efforts. But he basically said that Microsoft is on this mission to build their own large language models, their own platform. And I was like, right, yes, so what? Who cares? But then he was saying there's tension between Sam Altman of OpenAI and Mustafa Suleyman, who was recently hired at Microsoft to run the AI teams. And that tension perhaps is going to lead to a bigger breakup between OpenAI and Microsoft. I think it's what was inferred, at least.
And you know what? I think what Benioff might be saying there is he thinks Microsoft's models suck. Microsoft and OpenAI are on the rocks in terms of their relationship, in his view. And so
go buy Salesforce software.
Yes. Use their, and so when Microsoft is no longer able to rely on OpenAI to...
Things are going to fall apart.
Yeah, that's what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Hey, who knows? Maybe it could happen. I saw Frank Shaw, the Microsoft communications chief, put something on LinkedIn of some sort of meme about like, why are you so obsessed with me? Benioff, he's like, it's hard to find an interview that he's done in the past 3 months.
He's really on the tack on Microsoft, which is interesting.
It makes you wonder, like, is there not enough there for him to make his point purely with the benefits of Salesforce's software? I mean, this is a new era. Agentforce, in his words, is unlocking this entire new workforce. Like, and I recognize he is saying that, but when he starts to get into some of the competitive stuff, you start going like, well, what's going on there? Who knows? I don't want to be attacked by the Salesforce fan people. Are there? I don't know. I'm sure
the
there
Salesforce mafia. I don't know.
Hey, but John, you told me that you had a quiz. Is that related to the politics stuff?
It is.
Okay.
It's a theory I have, and it relates to Elon and Trump and the first buddy, Elon. And it just seems to me that, and I think this is where I want to put the betting wage out there, how long before that bromance splits? Because it just seems like two gigantic personalities that aren't going to be able to coexist in the same room for very long, in my opinion. So what is your estimate?
So this
maybe it goes all 4 years. I don't know.
So this is less a quiz than it is the premise for a wager.
It's a wager, yes. I'm sure you can go on one of the great betting platforms out there and make this wager right now.
Oh, gosh. And what constitutes a split? The end of the Department of Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency? And Elon no longer...
The end of Elon's involvement in Doge.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll say 6 months.
Yeah, that's about what I was saying. I don't think it gets through the summer.
Yeah. Elon's got a lot going on, man.
I just don't understand how he does what he does.
I think he's got a lot of energy. Let's just say that.
Even with a lot of energy, there's something will have to break.
It hasn't yet.
Well, or you could argue it has.
Okay.
I mean, is
understood.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, hey, there is a company that is kind of based in the Seattle area. Its CEO is here, but says it's not based here. And it's actually a really influential company that's very relevant right now in the world that we're talking about.
And speaking of Elon and Twitter specifically.
Yes. So we'll talk about this company.
Mystery company.
Mystery company.
Wow.
Coming up next. This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
Why is it important to talk to children and young adults about their financial goals? I'm Brian Westbrook. In Money Hacks, presented by BECU, we'll talk about what parents can do to help educate their children. And Stacy Black is the lead financial educator for BECU. What tips would you have for parents?
I would say start early, and it's never early enough. The sooner we get started, the more we're going to position our children for bright financial futures. So having those conversations, being open, honest, just talking through everyday spending and finances with our kids is important.
It's important for them to know that just because you can walk up to an ATM, that doesn't mean there's an unlimited supply of cash.
Yep. It's not free money, which I thought it was.
Man, I'm learning a lot. Well, you can learn a lot more on this episode of Money Hacks. Check out geekwire.com/BECU. I'm Brian Westbrook.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. So how's your media consumption these days? What are you doing?
Well, high, depending upon what I'm spending my time on, is very different than it was 3 months ago, though.
So my big problem these days in terms of just pure consumption and participation in social networks is I don't know where to go anymore. There was a time in my life, in our lives in the world, when it was basically Twitter and Facebook, maybe a little bit of LinkedIn. And now you add Threads and Mastodon and BlueSky into the mix. And it feels like this world of media that was already fragmented out there has gotten even more so. And don't get me wrong, I mean, competition is good, but this downside of not being able to post one place and know that you're going to reach the vast majority of the people you want to reach, or vice versa, that you go and spend time on that platform and you're going to miss a large portion of the people who you would have been following in the past on Twitter. It's this odd world that we're in right now.
Yes, agreed. And frankly, there is just way too much media and way too much social media. There are too many social media platforms, to your point. This is why the whole discussion and debate around TikTok, I just find fascinating, because who really cares, other than some influencers who are making some money on it, if it went away?
I will tell you. My teenager cares.
There would be a easily filled gap of entertainment if that disappeared.
Fair enough.
And whether it's controlled by the Chinese government or not, who knows? But all I'm saying is they would simply just move to another platform. And you saw people doing this, moving to even Chinese-backed competitors. And so there are and now we sound like old fogies, there are too many of these platforms. There's too much media flowing, and it's nonsense. And I think it's one of the reasons why, and we were going to discuss this a little bit, why I've really tuned out.
Okay.
I have really tuned out, definitely on social media, and I've centered my news consumption on certain platforms where I can intentionally skip over political news.
Okay, so my take on all of this is that I know folks are feeling overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the political world, and I do think that social platforms and the fact that you're getting a lot of this information not from journalistic sites, but from a range of other people who may or may not put their own spins on it, I think that should, in an ideal world, lead us back to traditional media.
I would think so. I think the pendulum will have to swing back.
I hope it does. I don't think it has yet. I
No.
think it's stayed solidly in the crowd, getting your information from...
Well, this past election is a great example of people not getting their... I mean, a lot of people proclaim that this was the end of traditional media, the end of traditional news.
Yes, but wouldn't it be nice if it was instead this altruistic flocking back to traditional journalism?
It would be, well, for us, yes, we think it would be nice. We're in the business. And I got to say, for society, you would think that it would be a benefit as well.
Yes.
That we would move back to a place where journalism and the art and science of journalism is actually revered and respected. And it's not an easy job to do. It takes a lot of horsepower. It takes a lot of energy. It's hard to do, but it's an important job to try to talk to actual people and hear what they have to say and bring in experts to provide analysis on what's going on. That's not easy to do. And yes, we've moved 180 degrees away from it.
As a society, for sure. So one of the players in this wider world of social media is BlueSky. And for me, I've dabbled a little bit in BlueSky. I really appreciate it in that it's not dependent on the algorithms to figure out your tastes. It really depends on who you follow. And going there, for me, to the extent I have, has been like reuniting with some of the people I used to know on Twitter.
I've heard this a bunch from folks that have embraced BlueSky.
But interestingly, it hasn't been enough to make me go back and back and back again and again. And I worry that my own mind has become susceptible to those algorithms that get me going back to YouTube, for example, and to Twitter and LinkedIn even.
Yeah. I've really shifted my consumption on social media into LinkedIn more than any of the other platforms. Really, I mean, Meta, Facebook, Insta I was never big on. And Twitter, I don't get a lot of value out of Twitter anymore. But LinkedIn has really risen up as an important social media and business platform.
So speaking of journalism, there was a really good piece, some good digging by Cascade PBS, the newsroom that was previously known as crosscut.com here in the Seattle region. They did a good profile on BlueSky, and they got an emailed statement from Jay Graber, the CEO, who's based here in the Seattle region, along with a number of the company's engineers and other employees. And they made a specific point of saying, yes, but BlueSky is not a Seattle company. I know you saw this story.
Yeah.
How did you read this?
I think it's how a lot of startup companies are thinking about themselves. And it speaks to another challenge we have as a society about not having a connection to a community or a place. I mean, that's, I know, very important to you. It's very important to me. And I think losing that is, it's sad in some ways. Now, I understand the economic benefits of doing that. And there are a lot of companies that are structured that way. But I don't know. I feel like there is something that is lost when you don't have a connection point to a geographic place.
So the economic benefit would be better recruiting,
better recruiting, cheaper workers, ability to work at all hours. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why a company moves fully remote, and they are adamant that they are a fully remote company. And to that point, I do speak to a lot of startup companies that are 100% embracing that approach. And it's kind of hard for us as a news organization that focuses on Seattle area and Pacific Northwest startups to kind of know what is a Seattle startup. Like, I mean, BlueSky has its name, Seattle-based, in front of its name, but it's really not based here.
No, and in fact, I think they would not put Seattle-based in front of their name. In fact, even though the CEO is here, I think they had to put it on some of their social profiles just because they had no other choice. But they're very adamant about the fact that they're not based here. They're, as Zillow would say, they're based in the cloud, cloud HQ.
Or companies say they're Earth-based,
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a new world. It's a different world. And to your point, for us in particular, it creates issues and questions about the companies we cover and the range of companies that fit into the definition of what makes sense with our Pacific Northwest focus.
On the flip side, I've spoken to many venture capitalists on this very topic who are adamant that the best startup companies do have a geographic and a physical footprint and have to be working together in an office. And that's how the best startup companies are formed. I personally think the jury is out on that. And I think there are a lot of different models that will work for different types of companies. But the number of venture capitalists I talk to who say they are very much looking at companies that the founders are together or the technical team is all working together in a common space is very important to them. So companies that want to get that funding may need to think about that philosophy. And I know you've written about some of these companies that have embraced like the 5-day work week. Obviously, BlueSky is 5-day in the office.
5
we
days
should
in the
say,
office,
yeah,
yes.
because BlueSky might be working 7 days a week, but just not in the same physical office.
Well, speaking of funding, there was another big story along those lines this week. So let's talk about that. It relates specifically to the Seattle area, but also other places too. Let's talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire. It's Todd Bishop, and I wanted to tell you about a favorite podcast of mine. It's called Booming, and it's a show that has opened my eyes to a whole range of things, like what's really happening when I scan a digital coupon at the grocery store, and how robots are changing the construction of buildings in downtown Seattle, among many other topics. Booming is a podcast from KUOW Public Radio in Seattle. It's about the economic forces shaping our lives in the Pacific Northwest. It's co-hosted by reporters Joshua McNichols and Monica Nicholsberg. That's a familiar name and voice to longtime GeekWire readers and listeners. They answer questions that listeners are wondering about, like Why are sports tickets so expensive? Or how hard should you actually work at work? Plus, every episode ends with a game. That's Booming from KUOW Public Radio. Find episodes on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. Madrona Venture Group, Seattle's homegrown VC firm, raised a big fund this week, John. Our colleague Taylor Soper covered it. This was quite a bit of money, $770 million. And I think in the context of what we cover, it was interesting in part because the VC landscape has been very difficult for startups. This was a very large fund that they're raising with the ability to deploy it not only here in the Pacific Northwest, but elsewhere, including Silicon Valley, with a real focus on AI applications, intelligent applications as they have. What was your take on this?
Well, we should say it's actually two funds is how they're structuring it. So they have a fund that's geared towards earlier stage startup investing, and I think they're going to do about 30 seed stage to Series A style rounds out of that fund, and then a fund for Series B and larger, so larger companies and what we like to call, the deals they missed oftentimes.
Right.
If they miss a deal and they want to get back into it, they can invest at a later stage, and they're going to do about a dozen deals out of that. So, I I think that I'm just bringing up the number of deals because it kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. They're going to do, it's a lot of money, but they're going to do about 40 deals out of that, 40 new companies, some which will be based here, some which will not be based here. Of those, how many are actually going to prove to be a groundbreaking, massive success? 10% if they're lucky, right? So we're talking about maybe 4 companies in a good environment. And of those, do any become the next Amazon, Microsoft, Expedia? It's just such a risky game, right? And they really are betting that one of those 40 becomes a massive, massive success.
Well, they've certainly got a track record. Some of the companies that they've invested in the past include Redfin, Aptio, Smartsheet, and they really got their start based on their late founders' investment in Amazon, Tom Alberg. And so, they have a track record. And
they have a track record. It's been tough lately, and I guess it's a testament to Madrona's relationships and their longstanding power in the Pacific Northwest tech ecosystem as the dominant venture firm that they were able to raise this amount of money, and it's a good amount of money because it's been a slow going in the venture market for the last couple of years in terms of just M&A exits and IPOs. There have not been many big deals happening. And so I think the bet is that in the next 3-4 years, maybe during this Trump administration, things really light up in terms of new exits and really sparks additional activity in the venture capital ecosystem.
Traditionally, the arrival of a Republican presidential administration would indicate more relaxed regulatory environment. If you go by the traditions of politics in the two parties now, whether that's the case here, who knows? But that could indicate that big tech M&A, the ability for larger tech companies to acquire smaller tech companies and give exits to investors like Madrona, could improve.
Yeah, I think in the last 4 years, a lot of tech companies have been timid in terms of doing those direct deals, not knowing what sort of scrutiny they were going to get, especially as the tech companies got much, much bigger, generated much, much more cash. I think there was a lot more scrutiny in this past administration. And so maybe it does open the door for some additional exits here in the next 3 to 5 years.
Taylor reports that Madrona expects to invest about 75% of its new funds in the Pacific Northwest and the rest on companies outside the region. So that gives you a sense. About 3/4 will be somewhere in this region. So, okay. One last thing, John, here. I had a lot of fun over the past few weeks, and hopefully folks heard the podcast we had yesterday, focusing on the notion of revisiting The Road Ahead, the classic Bill Gates book from 1995 and 1996. And you can listen to that podcast and the discussion with Peter Reinerson, who was Bill Gates' co-author, and all the details were really interesting for me. And I found the parallels to modern day technology really interesting. And the way the rise of the internet back then is very similar in terms of the pace and the implications to what we're seeing now with AI. So I'll let folks listen to that podcast. But I found a really interesting piece of trivia in the process of reporting that, to me at least. I don't know if you know what Microsoft's original motto was.
Well, there's a desktop on every...
Close.
No. A computer on every desktop and every home, which they then in parentheses...
Okay, yes.
Running Microsoft software.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So a computer on every desk and in every home. And that was the public version of the mission statement, the vision statement. And internally, they always added something else.
Yeah, running Microsoft software, right?
Right. And I don't think I've ever heard that said externally before. And the reason is, especially when Microsoft got into the antitrust era, it sounded kind of domineering and dominant. Like it wasn't so much visionary as it was trampling on the rest of the competition.
Yes.
So on the CD-ROM for the road ahead that was shipped with the original version of Bill Gates' book, it says this.
Based in Redmond, Washington, Microsoft employs thousands of people worldwide. The company operates on a vision of a computer on every desk, in every home, running Microsoft software.
Got him!
Oh, finally. What? 35 years later? What year was this?
1995.
Okay.
30 years later.
Okay. Yeah, you got him. Big scoop. You got your scoop finally. Okay.
Anyway, that was my
So
own little,
this was your thing. This was the first time you heard them publicly
say that.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Well, you got to have little things that really light you up, and I guess that's one for you.
All right, so I'm looking forward to keeping going with that series.
Well, the story was great. I enjoyed
Thanks
it
for reading
immensely. I thought it was a really cool look at where Microsoft was and how Bill Gates was thinking about Microsoft in that era, and the connection points to today are just really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with this series. I'll link to it from the show notes, and we got some good ones coming up. I've got the story idea list has become refined. I'm really looking forward to exploring the history of Microsoft's relationship with Apple and where that is today.
Yeah, you don't hear much about it, do you?
No, you hear
it's
about
a great opportunity to talk about what's going on there. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so that is one that's coming up, and we've got other interesting things having to do with some places on the Microsoft campus that we're going to get to go into. And John, I got you access as well.
Cool.
That no outsider has ever been. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that on a future show as well. And of course, if folks out there are interested in this topic, be sure to check the show notes in the site, because we have our Microsoft at 50 event coming up on March 20th in Seattle, featuring former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer and other special guests. All right. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. Curt Milton edited this week's show. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.